Hi all, as you are joining, we're seeing the numbers of participants tick up. So I'm just going to wait 1 second, and then it seems to have hit a plateau. We will get started with a video to begin. It might actually have just happened. So why don't we go ahead and start with the video? Well, with that very powerful message, I wanted to welcome all of you to the second in our series of webinars for the Climate Links community on the new USAID climate strategy. My name is Genevieve Maricle. I have just recently returned after several years in a few different spots, but I am serving in a senior climate and environment advisor role, working closely with Gillian Caldwell, the Chief Climate Officer. And I will just say the only other quick thing to say in terms of introduction is that I had the opportunity to work on the first climate strategy. And so to come in to the agency as this climate strategy, which is incredibly powerful in its reach and in sort of the tangible things that it is that it digs into, it's been quite inspiring to sort of revisit the new and very much you know, I don't exactly know how to term it, but it's just a very inspiring new product that I think we're very much looking forward to talking about here today and to digging into with all of you in its implementation coming up. So what I will do is very quickly kind of give an introduction to why the strategy matters, walk through the strategy in a bit more detail. We do have an exciting panel here today that reflects the strategy's truly whole of agency nature. Unfortunately, Allison Brown of USAID's Bureau for Conflict Prevention and Stabilization will not be able to join us, but we do have Juniper Neill from our Regional Development Mission for Asia, Kara Reeve from our Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, as well as the strategy implementation team here to give us more insights to both how the strategy or just how the strategy can play out, and the role of regional missions in catalyzing climate action, and how we're thinking about it. A lot we can cover in this, and we're really looking forward to it. I do want to very quickly say, before getting to details of all this, that if you do have questions as you're listening, you can use the question and answer feature of Zoom, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. So separate from the chat, the Q&A feature, you can actually put questions directly in there, and we'll be able to log them as we go. And then when we get to the sort of Q&A section, which we find to be a very valuable portion of this, we'll be able to go to them and speak directly to them, as well as answering some of them that are more clarification questions in written form. So with that, please turn to the next slide. So we want to start with sort of what we unfortunately all know, which is that how the impacts of climate change look on all of us vulnerable. As temperatures and sea levels rise, people's lives are increasingly being upended or cut short by droughts, storms, fires, and floods that will only become more destructive unless we act with the urgency and ambition that this crisis demands and that we all know that we need. Climate change is threatening development progress and exacerbating global inequities, increasing water and food scarcity, the need for humanitarian assistance and displacement, and contributing to conflict. But at the same time, response presents an opportunity to improve livelihoods. Decarbonizing industry means less air pollution that negatively affects health, and climate resilient infrastructure means people are safer when disaster strikes and reduces the need for costly repairs after every storm. And investing in green jobs presents an opportunity to make workforces more inclusive. Next slide, please. Tackling climate change is a priority in many, many ways. It's a huge priority for the US government across all parts of it. And for USAID's part, climate must be a priority because it touches everything that we do. We've heard Administrator Powers say often that we are a climate agency, and this is where it comes from. It is part of a recognition that every goal that we have in some way can be affected by climate change. As you'll hear in a minute, as we dig into that, we've developed a new climate strategy that responds to this urgency with an all hands on deck approach. And really only by taking an all hands on deck approach to its implementation can we meet the most immediate needs of the climate crisis today and support larger scale transformations in key global systems like agriculture, energy, governance, infrastructure, and health that are essential in the long term. And this support goes both ways. Our Africa team is boosting global health efforts by targeting resources to bring stable renewable energy to hospitals and facilities, keeping the lights on so that these centers can tackle COVID across the continent. I know many of you have been doing great work for decades, and I'm excited to keep working with you through this new strategy to take on this great challenge of our time, and I know the whole rest of the team is as well. This cannot be business as usual. USAID and the development community can make a bigger difference, and I genuinely believe that by working with everyone here, we can do exactly that. So with that, I'm going to jump a little bit more into the strategy itself. Next slide, please. So what we have been doing. The strategy builds on our previous 2012 to 2018 climate change and development strategy, the one that I mentioned. I had the opportunity to work on in its original form, which focused on specific climate change mitigation and adaptation measures. USAID has been doing all of this for decades. We're really scaling up and expanding our impact. As you'll see in the next few slides, we've doubled down on the targeted action while looking to simultaneously address the key systems that threaten to undermine our work. Next slide, please. So USAID committed to launch a new climate strategy at the Leaders Summit on Climate in April 2021 that President Biden hosted. 1 year later, that commitment was met, and we now have a climate strategy that will guide AID's work on climate through 2030. Throughout the process, we held more than 40 listening sessions with internal and external stakeholders from around the globe. These included current and former USAID staff in Washington and in the field, implementing partners, the international NGO community, the donor community, women, youth, Indigenous peoples groups, and the private sector. And I know, as somebody who was sitting at an environmental NGO at the time that these listening sessions were happening, just how genuinely engaging they felt. So I got to see the impact of that on the actual end product. USAID held a public comment period from November 3rd through 24th, 2021, during which time we received and addressed more than 2,800 comments. We also held an internal comment period where we received and addressed more than 1,000 comments. Next slide, please. In the strategy, AID plans to leverage our convening power, global presence, longstanding partnerships, and breadth of technical expertise to make a real difference in the global fight against climate change. We will partner with local communities, looking to local solutions and amplifying unheard voices. We also work with communities that are disproportionately vulnerable to climate change. This strategy elevates equity and locally led solutions as core principles. We will center our action on the diverse communities in which we work and engage local, marginalized, and underrepresented groups, which affects everything AID does, as we've said multiple times in this, and every sector has a role. This will greatly increase USAID's impact in tackling climate change, and it will also go a long way towards making our programs more resilient to the climate impacts that are already underway. Next slide, please. So this strategy includes 6 ambitious high-level targets that reflect how a whole-of-agency approach can dramatically increase USAID's impact. These targets, like our COP announcements, are not business as usual. They're ambitious and reflect how important and urgent this situation is. For example, for our mitigation target, USAID will partner with countries to support activities that reduce, avoid, or sequester 6 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, or the equivalent of all US GHG greenhouse gas emissions in 2020. These 2030 targets will be updated and supplemented with interim targets throughout the strategy's lifetime as our budget and experience with delivery evolves. The targets were developed in collaboration with monitoring, evaluation, and learning staff from around the agency. Next slide, please. This slide shows the framework at the heart of USAID's new climate strategy. As you can see, the strategy aims to enable us to both confront the most urgent demands of the climate crisis and transform systems in a way that helps lock in our trajectory for lasting and feasible net zero and climate resilient pathways. In all of this, we are committing to empowering accessible and inclusive approaches through which local communities and the marginalized and underrepresented groups within them are meaningfully engaged as climate change agents. And we're thinking about how USAID can ensure we are reflecting these values internally. That means reforming our own operations to combat and be resilient to this crisis and ensure our workforce is stronger through an enhanced focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Next slide, please. USAID will coordinate internally to organize and galvanize a whole-of-agency response to the climate crisis. The team coordinating the USAID's climate strategy implementation includes personnel from across all of USAID's bureaus and independent offices. Of course, we can't achieve the huge scale of our targets without all hands on deck, and that includes our partners. We will continue working across US government departments and agencies, with Congress, with our partner governments, implementing partners, and with local organizations to identify how we can best target our work to achieve optimal climate and development objectives, both now and in the future. USAID will develop and regularly update robust guidance for tracking our progress as we implement this strategy. The strategy also includes requirements and recommendations for all USAID operating units to facilitate implementation. To reduce inefficiencies and improve coherence across all programming, much of our implementation guidance integrates into existing processes such as budget planning, workforce recruitment, and monitoring, evaluation, and learning, which are routine features of the USAID program cycle. We are dedicating resources to capacity building, knowledge management, and communications to support our whole-of-agency approach to climate change. As we ramp up our climate change programming and incorporate climate action throughout all sectors and operations that USAID works on, we anticipate that there will be new opportunities to partner with USAID to tackle the climate crisis. You can find out more about how to partner with us by visiting workwithusaid.org. With that, I want to turn it over to Juniper to give us some perspectives on what this means for our work on the ground.
Great. Thank you so much, Genevieve. I really appreciated getting that overview again, even though we've been so involved here at the mission here in Bangkok with the development of the strategy. It's so nice to see it pulled together in that compilation. Good morning and good evening, everybody. My name is Juniper Neill, and I'm the Deputy Mission Director at USAID's Regional Development Mission for Asia, or RDMA as we call it, based here in Bangkok in Thailand. I was just looking through the participant list, and it's so great to see so many current and former colleagues who have joined us here today, as well as partners beyond USAID. I'm thrilled you could join us to hear about the strategy overview, but in particular about some of the particular things that we're doing here at RDMA, which we wanted to share with you. As you've heard from Genevieve, this strategy really does represent the best thinking, resulting from a highly consultative process. And here at RDMA, we were one of 20 missions globally tasked with providing a field perspective as the strategy was drafted, including recommending regional stakeholders to help USAID socialize that strategy. This mission advisory group ensured a rigorous process for generating, synthesizing, and sharing field-based input to the strategy development. I cannot overstate how important it is that this strategy is so well informed by the experiences and knowledge of USAID field-based staff, partners, and stakeholders. I've been with USAID long enough to know that that doesn't always happen that way, so it's very much appreciated from the field. I've spent my entire career working in the climate environment field, the majority with USAID. However, my understanding of the human dimensions of climate change, and in particular effective adaptive practices, was heavily influenced by my time at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. During my time in the Climate and Societal Interactions Division, I was fortunate to work on an innovative applications research program aimed at improving our understanding of climate adaptation through stakeholder-driven research. That experience influenced my thinking substantially, so that when I came to USAID in 2005, I was able to champion the idea of transdisciplinary development, focused on solving system-level problems through sound data-driven interventions and informed by stakeholders' real and urgent needs. USAID's new climate change strategy guides and challenges us to do just that. Next slide, please. For my presentation today, I will focus on how the USAID Regional Development Mission for Asia is operationalizing the climate strategy. Given our mandate as a regional mission and guided by our Regional Development Cooperation Strategy, or RDCS as we call it, we look at development challenges like climate change through a regional lens, as opposed to our bilateral missions that focus on one country. In tackling this challenge, RDMA, like other regional platforms, has several comparative advantages. First, we are able to work on climate change as a transboundary issue and address its impacts like migration or supply chain disruptions across borders. Second, we can mainstream climate change adaptation and mitigation into regional policies and plans. For example, trade agreements or river basin management strategies, which is an opportunity to build resilience and reduce vulnerability at a larger scale. Lastly, regional missions can strengthen the capacity and commitment of regional institutions like ASEAN and their member states to mitigate emissions and adapt to climate change. Regional missions can help the agency quickly scale up and achieve ambitious targets in the climate strategy. In Southeast Asia, the climate change disproportionately affects already marginalized and underrepresented groups, as Genevieve talked about. This obviously is a global issue. Strengthening the resilience of these vulnerable communities is integral to our regional strategy. In response, we will partner with these groups at the regional scale to design and implement our climate activities. And in fact, we are already doing this. Our work in this area is also guided by USAID's policy on promoting the rights of Indigenous peoples, partnering with Indigenous peoples to elevate their participation and leadership region-wide to lead climate action. For example, climate change is affecting water flows in the Mekong River Basin. We're helping to amplify the voices of Indigenous groups affected by the loss of this crucial resource and supporting their work on human rights advocacy and public participation. We're also working with journalists to better tell the stories of the Mekong's Indigenous communities. We want to make sure the right data, the right tools, and the right approaches are available to help vulnerable and marginalized groups build resilience. The next few slides illustrate some examples of how regional programs can provide a vital link in addressing the roots of the climate crisis and help the agency achieve the climate strategy targets. Next slide, please. In our region, unsustainable agriculture and land use is a leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions. Our Green Invest Asia activity mobilizes private finance to support sustainable, low-carbon land use in the agriculture and forestry sectors in Southeast Asia. As a regional mission, our advantage is that we are able to work with companies and financial institutions operating across Southeast Asia, influencing the sustainability of entire regional supply chains. Since it launched in late 2017, USAID Green Invest Asia has unlocked $45 million in private green finance for agribusiness and forestry companies sourcing from Southeast Asia, which translates to a reduction of 49 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent over 15 years. That's the equivalent of the carbon dioxide emissions from burning almost 6 billion gallons of gasoline. For example, we partnered with the world's largest coffee buyers to encourage their suppliers to shift to low carbon coffee cultivation. Together, we're supporting a series of sustainable coffee dialogues with companies across the coffee value chain to understand how buyers and suppliers can work together to reduce carbon emissions from coffee production. And the demand for this type of support to the private sector is growing, which creates a huge opportunity for USAID globally. Companies are feeling pressure to reduce emissions, and USAID can provide the technical assistance they need, measuring carbon footprints, providing financial advisory support, conducting business feasibility studies, identifying sustainable sourcing strategies, and capital matchmaking. Projects like Green Invest Asia can help USAID meet the goal of mobilizing $150 billion in climate finance by 2030. And offer opportunities for the USG to scale and expand these partnerships to other companies and other regions. Next slide, please. In Asia, demand for energy is growing rapidly, but regional power systems continue to rely on aging infrastructure and outdated market mechanisms. USAID Clean Power Asia, our flagship energy project, ended last year. The project worked with stakeholders across the Lower Mekong to accelerate the regional transition to a high-performing, low-carbon power sector. Over the course of 5 years, the program mobilized close to $8 billion and installed over 9,000 megawatts of renewable energy capacity. USAID Clean Power Asia also contributed to preventing the release of over 90 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent over 15 years. Building on the successes of Clean Power Asia, we recently launched the USAID Southeast Asia Smart Power Program, a $40 million initiative that will work with the private sector and regional institutions to help accelerate the rapid deployment of clean energy technologies across Southeast Asia. The project aims to support the ASEAN regional goal of reaching 23% renewable energy by 2025 and will be a significant contributor to the agency's global emissions targets. Next slide, please. The Regional Development Mission for Asia also works with partners to provide climate services, climate data and information to support decision-making. Severe Mekong, a partnership between USAID and NASA, uses publicly available satellite data to enhance resilience and sound landscape management in the Lower Mekong. Severe is a critical tool in meeting the agency target to strengthen the climate resilience of 500 million people by 2030. Severe Mekong helps the regional institutions we partner with, like the Mekong River Commission, understand, plan for, and respond to the impacts of climate variability and change. Severe develops demand-driven tools and services that help the region to better prepare for disasters, improve early warning systems, reduce emissions, and improve air quality. For example, Severe Mekong provided satellite imagery and data to the Mekong River Commission to inform the implementation of the drought monitoring strategy. As a result, farmers have early information to mitigate the impact of droughts on their crops, and policymakers have better decision support tools to develop and implement drought prevention and mitigation strategies. Earth observation technologies offer enormous potential to help us develop and implement climate adaptation and mitigation policies. We are in the process of co-creating the next phase of Severe, a Severe Southeast Asia that will expand the geographic focus and deepen engagement with regional institutions to accelerate climate resilience. In this new phase, we'll also ensure that Severe's data and tools are available to build adaptive capacity for vulnerable and marginalized groups, including Indigenous peoples, and to meet their unique adaptation needs and constraints. Next slide, please. These are just a few examples of how the Regional Development Mission for Asia is putting the strategy into practice and working at the regional level to drive systemic change. And while we use our regional platform to achieve ambitious action at scale, the success of our work is tied to on-the-ground bilateral efforts. We work closely with USAID bilateral mission colleagues to augment and amplify their programs, and will continue to do that during the implementation of the new climate strategy. In closing, I want to thank the organizers for hosting these webinars for the larger USAID community, and to thank all of you in advance for the hard work that lays ahead. Thank you so much. Back to you, Genevieve.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And I think, you know, we all know that our missions are champions in the field, and it's just really important to recognize that many of them have been tackling the climate crisis for decades and coming up with innovative solutions. And so it's just great to hear some of those examples. We've really designed this strategy, and I think Juniper spoke to this really well, to give missions the tools and support that they need to really ramp up our impact. So now I really want to make sure we get a chance to get to your questions. So I'll just note again that if you haven't already done so, please do put your questions in the Q&A feature of the chat, and then we'll sort of bring, I will do my best to bring voice to as many as possible, and give a chance for the folks here to really weigh in response. So what I will actually start with is a question actually to you, Juniper. I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on what new projects the mission is excited about over the coming years that sort of, you know, you've just spoken about some of them, so I don't want to make you repeat all of that, but is there anything that's sort of coming down the pike that you would love to highlight here that gives us a sense of some of the kinds of things that are developing as all of this evolves?
Sure. I'm trying to think about what I can say in a procurement sensitive format for this audience. So, you know, I guess I'll just bring it back to our strategy, to the RDCS. When we were developing that strategy in 2020, we really were asking ourselves how we could have a very firm foundation around resilience in a climate change context without sort of highlighting the climate change nature or component of that strategy, you know, under a previous administration where that was not necessarily a priority that was being highlighted. And so we wanted something that focused first and foremost on building resilience across the multiple sectors that we worked in, and that would really stand the test of time across varying or potential political priorities that might emerge. And I think that's what's really, you know, I would say to give our team, you know, huge kudos around that, because it was a really interesting process that we used to develop our regional strategy. And I think what comes out very clearly in it, and this is a publicly available document, all of you can find it on RDMA's website, is that we really do focus on resilience, and we focus on regional institutions for our strategy. And that's, as I spoke about, the really comparative advantage of a regional platform is to be able to partner with, support the priorities of regional institutions, help advance those institutions that have the mandate to really achieve some very significant development impact, whether it's in water resources management, whether it's in regional health system strengthening, working on combating trafficking in persons, regional fisheries management. Illegal and unregulated fishing, for example, is an area that we've worked in for many, many years that obviously through a climate lens would have a very particular way that we would approach that program. But frankly, every sector that we work in really does need to have that climate lens and focus on it. Something I'm excited about that our teams have been, you know, I think discussing between themselves, and this is where I really think our strategy tries to get us to work in a transdisciplinary setting and across different sectors, is around things like malaria prevention and elimination and climate forecasting. So, you know, I mentioned Servier. I talked about Servier a little bit, and entities like Servier and with the Asia Disaster Preparedness Center really are well positioned, I believe, to be able to drive data products and the development of data products and decision support tools that are really going to be useful to the multiple sectors that we engage with that are priorities in our strategy, including protecting and defending human rights and promoting the rights of marginalized populations, working to strengthen regional health systems. And we, you know, all saw how important that is over the last 2 years. Our strategy actually includes issues around global health security and pandemics. We've been working on that for many years. And when we look at the interface of biodiversity conservation, climate modeling and predictions, looking at the trends in land cover and land use change and how that might actually instigate or make more likely the kinds of zoonotic disease outbreaks that we're starting to see more of in the last 20 years. These are really integrated, complex programs. And I think what we're trying to do in terms of exciting new projects, to answer your question, is to think about where we could have the biggest impact. You know, where is the real value for RDMA in being able to do something that a bilateral mission is not positioned and doesn't have the mandate to do, to look at complexity at a regional scale across disciplines. And so, you know, to me, those are the kinds of things that I personally get really excited about. But, you know, I think I talked about that a little bit in terms of my own background, my professional training. I was really indoctrinated in that kind of systems level thinking. And the teams here at RDMA are doing a great job at reaching out across the traditional pillars of our sectors to start to work with each other on those kinds of questions. And I will say too that Rupa Korea is here. She's the Deputy Director of our Regional Environment Office and is able to answer any questions too. So Genevieve, you should feel free to throw any questions at Rupa as well. She's quite an expert in the environment stage.
That's great. Thank you so much. That was fantastic and really wonderful to have Rupa here. And I think we have the benefit actually of having stealthily Catherine Stratos in the crowd as well, who's played an enormous role in bringing this whole strategy to fruition. So we have some great voices with us to respond to questions you may have. I would actually love. We'll dig into a few of the questions posted in the Q&A in just a second, but I'd love to really quickly turn to Kara to ask, again, who's on our strategy implementation team, just to speak to the role of implementing partners and sort of taking that whole kind of all hands on deck question into sort of some of the details about how this works. What can implementing partners do to help really take this whole thing forward?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. The first thing I would do really is, read the strategy, absorb it, sit with it. It's a really well-written document. I think if you take the time to read it, you'll really get a good sense of the approach that we're taking here in the agency. And then really the way that we're going to meet the ambitious targets in the strategy is going to be through programs. And I think in the coming weeks, months, as new programs are in design and then procured, the goals and objectives of the strategy will manifest in those designs. And so I think we'll be looking for implementing partners to not only understand the strategy, but then be able to speak to it in creative and innovative ways through the procurement process with the proposals that they bring forth to the agency. So, get to know the strategy and then really come to us with, your best and brightest and innovative thinking so that we can, meet these targets in our programming around the world.
Sorry, not unmuted. Thank you so much for that. And I think one question I would actually love that came in the Q&A that I would love to put to everyone, all of the panelists and those who are on, is how the locally led development and that sort of principle within the strategy will look under the strategy. So how will localization and the priority that the administrator has placed on that shape calls? So I'll put that to anybody who's interested in sort of taking that on, and I may share a few thoughts on that as well.
I can speak about that a bit, and then if Rupa would like to chime in with some more specifics. This is a really important question. And frankly, it's a question that has been a priority for me for my entire career with USAID. And I personally, and I know, and I'm quite thrilled actually that the agency over many, many years has really prioritized this issue. About every 5 to 6 years, we call it something different, but it is nothing new for the agency. We, I think, have trouble on the imagination side or the implementation side of how we do that. And frankly, our systems are a little bit cumbersome, as everybody knows, to be able to do, I think, some of the kinds of localization work that we would like. But I will say that in my career, that has never stopped us from being able to do that, actually, to make really significant progress towards that goal. So for RDMA, what does that mean? Our regional strategy prioritizes regional organizations front and center as our partner of choice in our strategy in order to be able to achieve the goals that we have set out across 4 development objective areas. And those regional organizations, institutions, whether they're regional intergovernmental organizations like ASEAN, regional treaty organizations like the Coral Triangle Initiative on coral reefs, fisheries, and food security, CFDEC, which is working on regional fisheries management. I mentioned the Mekong River Basin Commission in my presentation. Those are, the regional intergovernmental organizations are really critical to us and are at the heart of our localization efforts, because we really see it as RDMA's role to partner with and support the goals and aspirations of those entities which are formulated by stakeholders, by countries, by policy law in the region to exist and to achieve some really impressive and ambitious development objectives. And so we feel that we are best placed in supporting them to be able to achieve their objectives the best that they can, and where we are able to bring some of our thinking and help shape what those policies and strategies will look like, so that in some cases they might be a little bit more in line with some of our policies and strategies, where we can help them to be a bit more ambitious in what they're trying to achieve. We really see that as our mandate to be able to do that through real partnerships. And that means it's really not about the money. It's about being able to develop those kinds of trusting partnerships, long-term partnerships, that go well beyond the 5 years of a country or a regional strategy for a mission, and to ensure that we are there for the long run, that USAID is a trusted and long-term partner. Now, on the money side, in terms of the mechanism, and I realize, Michelle, that's the question that you asked, moving away from contracts, for example. There will always be a place for contracts in USAID programming. There are critical sort of contract-only USAID needs that need to be served through the development and award of a contract mechanism. And there are a whole host of other kinds of programming that we can do through a PIO grant, a public international organization grant, to one of these regional institutions. So that's what we're really working on now. Our plan very much is to be able to not just develop the relationship partnership, but also to be able to develop the funding relationship with those institutions, because we realize in many cases, on the implementation side for regional intergovernmental institutions, for example, one of the big challenges is always about the funding agreements and implementation side of policies. They can have very ambitious policies and strategies that have been passed, and then it's quite a challenge on the implementation side. And so to the extent that we can support implementation advancement to really achieve real impact on the ground, and if that requires some funding support to help build internal organizational capacity, financial management capacity, reporting, MEL capacity, those things are really important. And so our vision has got to be for the long run. It's got to be 10, 20 years out in terms of what we're thinking is necessary, and the aspirations of those organizations. And obviously, there's also a really strong place for regional private sector organizations, regional indigenous organizations. So I'm talking more about NGOs or regional research and academia. So for us as a regional mission, as we identify our mandate at the regional scale, we'll really be looking to partner with those kinds of institutions, regional journalism networks and associations, and to the extent that we can start to work with them directly, that is the ambition. For USAID, for our DMA, for example, our target for small business utilization, now these are small US small businesses, of course, so that's one component of how we think about localization, is 5%. So every year, we start to try to improve that. We, for example, made a new award about a year and a half ago to a small business in the United States to implement our program in the renewable energy sector that's really focused on improving the engagement and leadership of women in the renewable energy sector. And so that's a very interesting program where we specifically sought out the expertise of a small business that would be able to help us to achieve our objectives. Now, in terms of regional organizations, regional businesses, regional entities, those are front and center in our strategy, and we are advancing big moves towards that, I will say. And if Rupa, if you want to talk about that a little bit more, by all means, jump in and you could give a couple examples.
Did you want to jump in now, Rupa, or should we hit one more question?
She might not be there. She might be having
trouble. We can go to the next question, and then if you
Yep.
jump back, feel free to come in, and we will have space.
Sure.
So one question, and then this actually might be the last because of timing, is just came up in the chat. Are current funding levels for climate action sufficient to meet the strategy's ambitious goals and targets? And how does the integration lens help to leverage available resources to affect change? So I actually might jump in on this very quickly myself, and then anybody else who's interested, please do feel free to come in. I think that, the honest answer is that as it stands right now, funding levels will make some of these things challenging. I think what we're very clear on is that, one of the targets is to mobilize $150 billion in private sector finance for these kinds of goals that the strategy has set. And we know we are woefully behind as a global community on adaptation finance. That's one example among sort of a broader, global ecosystem of issues. But we I think have recognized that we can't meet this sort of some of the core goals that the strategy sets without also having that goal met. So we have to be able to find the ways to both bring in, obviously we'll continue fighting for additional budget from public sources for this, but I think we are very aware that we have to really bring in new partners and bring in, I think one of the statistics I've heard Secretary or Spec Carey mention a few times recently is that effectively net zero targets as it stands right now cover effectively 65% of the global economy. So what we need to do is desperately actually deliver on that and make sure that sort of the financial system, the greening the financial system kind of efforts that have gone on actually deliver so that these funds do get to the kinds of projects that that desperately need them, but then also to bring the rest, other 35% of the economy kind of into the mix as well. So this is not yet, but we know what a path looks like to it. And that's one reason that this strategy really is kind of very clear-eyed about the how the programming work and that sort of finance work needs to go really hand in hand. I know there are many different ways to answer that and many layers to this question. So I don't know if anybody else wants to come in before we do close, but that is just a few thoughts on that. So I do, unfortunately, I think I actually can't quite multitask in the way that I might have been able to at 9 a.m. But I see first that unfortunately Rupa is having internet connectivity issues. So I think what we'll probably do now is thank all of you for joining us and bring this to a close, but do feel free to, there will be opportunities to engage us further on all of this. If you do have outstanding questions or questions that just came to your mind or questions that come up after you read the strategy, please do email us at team@climatelinks.org, or you are more than welcome to join our next webinar on the strategy, which is May 17th at 8 a.m. Eastern time. The strategy presentation will be similar, but we'll have a different mission presentation, this time from USAID Morocco, on integration of climate into education work, and we'll be able to get to some more questions at that point. I also want to plug that Climate Links is starting a monthly climate topics webinar series that will be fairly collaborative. In the registration links for this webinar, you can propose topics or let us know by email. And just what I want to do most is thank you to the panel for the really genuinely fascinating conversation and answers, and to all of you for being part of this conversation and for being actors in implementing this strategy and taking this forward as well. It just could not be more important. So let's go forward and meet this moment. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Genevieve. Thank you, everyone.